Though a light from the one lamp shone dimly on the bed, Hook stood in darkness himself. And at the first stealthy step forward he discovered an obstacle. The door of Slightly's tree. It did not entirely fill the aperture, and he had been looking over it. Feeling for the catch, he found, to his fury, that it was low down, beyond his reach. To his disordered brain it seemed that the irritating quality in Peter's face and figure visibly increased, and he rattled the door and flung himself against it. Was his enemy to escape him after all? But what was that? The red in his eye had caught sight of Peter's medicine standing on a ledge within easy reach. He fathomed what it was straight away, and immediately he knew that the sleeper was in his power. Lest he should be taken alive, Hook always carried about his person a dreadful drug, blended by himself of all the death-dealing rings that had come into his possession. These he had boiled down into a yellow liquid quite unknown to science, which was probably the most virulent poison in existence. 5 drops of this he now added to Peter's cup. His hand shook, but it was in exultation rather than in shame. It was in exultation rather than in shame. As he did it, he avoided glancing at the sleeper, but not lest pity should unnerve him, merely to avoid spilling. Then, one long, gloating look he cast upon his victim, and turning, wormed his way with difficulty up the tree. As he emerged at the top, he looked the very spirit of evil breaking from its hole. Donning his hat at its most rakish angle, he wound his cloak around him, holding one end in front as if to conceal his person from the night, of which it was the blackest part, and muttering strangely to himself, stole away through the trees. Peter slept on. The light guttered and went out, leaving the tenement in darkness. But still he slept. It must have been not less than 10 o'clock by the crocodile, when he suddenly sat up in his bed, wakened by he knew not what. It was a soft, cautious tapping on the door of his tree. Soft and cautious, but in that stillness it was sinister. Peter felt for his dagger till his hand gripped it. Then he spoke.
"Who is that?"
For long there was no answer. Then again, the knock.
"Who are you?"
No answer. He was thrilled, and he loved being thrilled. In 2 strides he reached his door. Unlike Slightly's door, it filled the aperture, so that he could not see beyond it, nor could the one knocking see him.
"I won't open unless you speak,"
Peter cried. Then at last the visitor spoke in a lovely, bell-like voice.
"Let me in, Peter."
It was Tink, and quickly he unbarred to her. She flew in excitedly, her face flushed and her dress stained with mud.
"What is it?"
"You can never guess,"
she cried, and offered him 3 guesses.
"Out with it!"
He shouted, and in one ungrammatical sentence, as long as the ribbons conjurers pull from their mouths, she told of the capture of Wendy and the boys. Peter's heart bobbed up and down as he listened. Wendy bound, and on the pirate ship, she who loved everything to be just so.
"I'll rescue her!"
he cried, leaping at his weapons. As he leapt, he thought of something he could do to please her. He could take his medicine. His hand closed on the fatal draught.
"No!"
shrieked Tinker Bell, who had heard Hook muttering about his deed as he sped through the forest.
"Why not?"
"It is poisoned."
"Poisoned? Who could have poisoned it?"
"Hook."
"Don't be silly. How could Hook have got down here?"
Alas, Tinker Bell could not explain this, for even she did not know the dark secret of Slightly's tree. Nevertheless, Hook's words had left no room for doubt. The cup was poisoned.
"Besides,"
said Peter, quite believing himself.
"I never fell asleep."
He raised the cup. No time for words now, time for deeds, and with one of her lightning movements, Tink got between his lips and the draught and drained it to the dregs.
"Why, Tink, how dare you drink my medicine?"
But she did not answer. Already she was reeling in the air.
What is the matter with you?
Cried Peter, suddenly afraid.
It was poisoned, Peter.
She told him softly.
And now I am going to be dead.
Oh, Tink, did you drink it to save me?
Yes.
But why, Tink?
Her wings would scarcely carry her now, but in reply she alighted on his shoulder and gave his chin a loving bite. She whispered in his ear,
You silly ass.
and then, tottering to her chamber, lay down on her bed. His head almost filled the fourth wall of her little room as he knelt near her in distress. Every moment her light was growing fainter, and he knew that if it went out she would be no more. She liked his tears so much that she put out her beautiful finger and let them run over it. Her voice was so low that at first he could not make out what she said. Then he made it out. She was saying that she thought she could get well again if children believed in fairies. Peter flung out his arms. There were no children there, and it was night-time, but he addressed all who might be dreaming of the Neverland, and who were therefore nearer to him than you think. Boys and girls in their nighties, and naked papooses in their baskets hung from trees.
Do you believe?
He cried. Tink sat up in bed, almost briskly, to listen to her fate. She fancied she heard answers in the affirmative, but then again she wasn't sure.
What do you think?
She asked Peter.
If you believe,
He shouted to them.
clap your hands. Don't let Tink die.
Many clapped. Some didn't. A few little beasts hissed. The clapping stopped suddenly, as if countless mothers had rushed to their nurseries to see what on earth was happening. But already Tink was saved. First, her voice grew strong. Then she popped out of bed. Then she was flashing through the room more merry and impudent than ever. She never thought of thanking those who believed, but she would have liked to get at the ones who had hissed.
And now to rescue Wendy.
The moon was riding in a cloudy heaven when Peter rose from his tree, begirt with weapons and wearing little else, to set upon his perilous quest. It was not such a night as he would have chosen. He had hoped to fly, keeping not far from the ground so that nothing unwanted should escape his eyes. But in that would have meant trailing his shadow through the trees, thus disturbing the birds and acquainting a watchful foe that he was astir. He regretted now that he had given the birds of the island such strange names that they are very wild and difficult of approach. There was no other course but to press forward in redskin fashion, at which happily he was adept. But in what direction? For he could not be sure that the children had been taken to the ship. A slight fall of snow had obliterated all footmarks, and a deathly silence pervaded the island, as if for a space nature stood still in horror of the recent carnage. He had taught the children something of the forest lore that he had himself learned from Tiger Lily and Tinkerbell, and knew that in their dire hour they were not likely to forget it. Slightly, if he had an opportunity, would blaze the trees, for instance. Curly would drop seeds, and Wendy would leave her handkerchief at some important place. But morning was needed to search for such guidance, and he could not wait. The upper world had called him, but would give no help. The crocodile passed him, but not another living thing, not a sound, not a movement. And yet he knew well that sudden death might be at the next tree, or stalking him from behind. He swore this terrible oath.
Hook or me this time.
Now he crawled forward like a snake, and again, erect, he darted across a space on which the moonlight played, one finger on his lip, and his dagger at the ready. He was frightfully happy.